Have you ever felt invisible? As if no one noticed your effort, your work, your dedication? Every day he traveled 80 kilometers of dusty dirt roads, facing snow, mud, and loneliness, to deliver letters that no one wanted to receive. His colleagues laughed at him. The community ignored him. They called him the postman of nowhere, the man who insisted on serving forgotten places, abandoned houses, people who didn't even open the door to thank him. But on a cold winter morning, John Walker opened his own mailbox, and his world stopped. Inside was a yellowed envelope worn by time, without a stamp, without a postmark. Only his name written by hand in a trembling script that seemed to carry decades of emotion. When he opened it, he found a single sentence that made him tremble. "Thank you for never giving up on me." No signature, no clue, just words that echoed in his soul like a cry from the past. What would you do if you received a message like that from someone you don't even remember helping? What John didn't know at that moment was that the letter would reveal a secret kept for 30 years, a story of survival, gratitude, and redemption that would change his life forever. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover about this man will make you rethink the meaning of kindness, purpose, and legacy. This is the true story of John Walker, the rural Montana mailman whom everyone despised, ridiculed, and ignored, until the day they discovered who he really saved when no one was looking. Have you ever done something for someone without expecting anything in return? Have you ever left a mark on someone's life without even realizing it? Because this story shows us that the most powerful gestures are those we make in silence, away from the spotlight, when we believe no one is paying attention. But someone was. And what happened after that mysterious letter transformed not only John's life, but an entire community that learned an unforgettable lesson about empathy, human dignity, and the true value of seeing the invisible. Get ready, because this journey will move you from beginning to end. Before continuing this story that's only just beginning, I need to ask you something that makes all the difference. If you feel this story is touching your heart, if it somehow resonates with something you've experienced or witnessed, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Have you ever been invisible to someone? Or perhaps you were the person who saw someone when no one else did. Tell us about it, because these real stories you share in the comments create a chain of empathy and connection that goes far beyond a video. And if you're enjoying this content, if you want more people to be impacted by true stories that restore our faith in humanity, leave your like now. It seems like a small gesture, but it's this like that makes the algorithm understand that this type of content needs to reach more people. More hearts that need to believe that goodness still exists and transforms lives. Your participation here is literally what makes this channel grow and reach other people who, like you, seek true inspiration amidst so much noise. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button now and activate the bell, because every week I bring you real stories like this one, which make us reflect on what really matters in life. I know you don't want to miss the next videos, because each story here carries a powerful lesson about empathy, purpose, and the silent impact we can have on other people's lives. You are part of this community that believes that small gestures can change the world. And now, let's go back to John's story, because what happened in the days following that mysterious letter will give you chills. John Walker was 52 years old when this story took place, and he already carried on his shoulders almost 3 decades of dusty roads, silence, and incomprehension. He was a rural mail carrier in Montana, one of the most vast and isolated states in the United States, where nature is unforgiving and the distances between people seem to measure not only kilometers, but also solitude. His route covered isolated farms, abandoned cabins, villages forgotten by progress, places where the modern world simply didn't reach or had given up trying to reach. While his colleagues worked in urban areas with fast, busy routes, full of buildings, shops, and people everywhere, John consciously chose the more difficult path. He chose to serve the people the world left behind, those who lived on the margins, in the forgotten corners of the map, where no one else wanted to go. Every day, John woke up at 5 in the morning, when the sky was still dark and the cold cut through his skin like a sharp blade. He faced snow that covered the roads, mud that swallowed the wheels of his pickup truck, storms that erased any trace of a path. He faced the heavy loneliness of someone who spends hours driving without seeing a living soul, only rusty fences, collapsing barns, and trees that bore witness to abandonment. Many saw him as a stubborn man, trapped in a meaningless job, someone who wasted his life delivering papers in places where nobody cared. Some even called him naive, an outdated idealist, one of those who insist on doing something that the world has already proven irrelevant. But the hidden truth, the one that nobody could see, is that John had a profound purpose that escaped the understanding of others. He wasn't just delivering letters, he was delivering dignity. He was saying with his quiet, unwavering presence that those people mattered, that those isolated lives still deserved to be seen, touched, remembered. John operated on a different frequency, guided by a mindset that placed service to others above social approval, personal comfort, or immediate recognition. While the world celebrated quick results, high numbers, and maximum efficiency, John measured his success in an invisible way, by the discreet gleam in the eyes of an elderly woman receiving a letter from her son, by the relief of a farmer who finally managed to pay a bill because the document arrived on time, by the small lives that continued because someone somewhere still cared. This was John Walker's journey, a silent journey, without spotlights, without applause, but laden with an impact that he himself could not fully measure. And it is precisely this kind of invisible transformation that the world needs most, but values least. At the post office, the jokes were constant, sharp as blades disguised as humor. "John, are you still going to deliver letters to cows?" a colleague mocked, while others laughed in the background, savoring the casual humiliation of someone who had chosen a different path. "Half of these houses don't even exist anymore," said another, shaking his head with that air of superiority of someone who thinks they understand the world better than everyone else. Even his supervisor, in a gesture he probably thought was kind, suggested that John request a transfer to a real route, as if the work he did every day wasn't real, as if the people he served were ghosts who didn't deserve dignity. These comments were the daily soundtrack of John's professional life, a kind of silent violence that slowly corrodes the soul, that makes you question your own decisions, your own worth, your own sanity. But here's the hidden truth that no one noticed. What hurt John most wasn't the contempt of his colleagues, nor the laughter or pitying glances. What truly tore at his heart was the indifference of the people he served. Those for whom he woke at 5 in the morning, braved snowstorms and impassable roads. Many barely opened the door when he arrived. Some took the mail from his hands without even looking him in the eye, without a thank you, without the slightest gesture of human recognition. John delivered bills that caused worry, advertisements that went straight to the trash, letters from the government that generated more fear than hope. Nothing that created connection, nothing that made anyone say, "It's good that you exist." And this absence of visible meaning was the hardest weight to bear. Imagine waking up every day knowing the whole world thinks you're wasting your life. Imagine continuing to do something when even the people who benefit from your efforts don't seem to notice. Your presence. That's the journey of the invisible, those who work behind the scenes of society, where there's no stage, no applause, no external validation to nourish a weary soul. It's the kind of psychological test that breaks most people, that makes you question your mindset, your values, your sense of purpose. But John kept going. Every single day, rain, snow, or scorching sun, he'd wake up, get in his truck, and drive those 80 kilometers of dirt roads as if he were fulfilling a sacred mission that only he could see. It was as if he were searching for something he hadn't yet found, answering a call that no one else could hear. Something greater was working through him, an invisible force that kept him going when any reasonable person would have given up. And this incomprehensible persistence, this seemingly irrational stubbornness, was exactly what was planting seeds of transformation that would take decades to blossom. Because sometimes the greatest impact we make isn't in immediate responses, isn't in instant recognition, but in what we plant in silence and that germinates when we're no longer looking. If you're starting to feel that this story is touching something deep within you, if you're realizing that perhaps there's a powerful lesson being revealed here, subscribe to the channel now, because what's about to happen in John's life will show that no act of kindness is wasted, even when it seems like no one is paying attention. What no one understood, what went completely unnoticed by all those who judged him, was that John didn't just deliver mail. He observed. With the silent attention of someone who truly sees people, John noticed details that revealed entire stories, invisible signs of life or danger that no one else was paying attention to. He noticed when the smoke stopped coming out of a house's chimney in the middle of a harsh Montana winter, a sign that something might be wrong, that someone might need help. He observed when the newspaper began to pile up on the porch, 3, 4, 5 issues stacked, indicating that perhaps that person was no longer able to leave the house, or worse, that something serious had happened. They were subtle clues that most people would ignore, but for John, they were silent cries for help. And he acted. Silently, without fanfare, without expecting recognition. He would ring the doorbell insistently when something seemed out of place. He would leave notes asking if everything was all right. He would call the local sheriff when his intuition triggered that internal alarm that only those who truly care can feel. Once, John saved an 83-year-old woman who had fallen in the kitchen and remained alone for 3 days, unable to get up, unable to ask for help, just waiting for someone, anyone, to notice her absence. It was John who noticed. It was John who broke down the back door and found her dehydrated, weak, but alive. Another time, he alerted the fire department about a fire that was starting in an abandoned barn before the flames spread to neighboring farms and caused a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. These stories existed, real and powerful, but John never told them. He never used them as bargaining chips to gain respect or silence the mockery of his colleagues. For him, it was simply doing the job right, fulfilling a moral responsibility that went far beyond the official description of his duties. He operated with a mindset that placed duty above ego, service, above self-promotion. And here is a profound truth about real impact. The most powerful transformations happen behind the scenes, away from the spotlight, when no one is filming, when no one is applauding. It is the discreet gestures, the silent decisions to do the right thing even when no one is watching, that plant the deepest seeds in the lives of others. And it was precisely this discretion, this refusal to use his kindness as a public performance, that planted the seeds of what was to come in John's life. Because when you act without expecting recognition, when your motivation is pure, uncontaminated by the need for external validation, the universe registers this in a mysterious way. The people you touch, even those who don't thank you at the moment, carry your kindness within them like an invisible mark. And sometimes years later, decades later, these seeds germinate in ways you could never imagine. If you're realizing that this story is revealing something about the true meaning of purpose and legacy, subscribe to the channel now, because what John is about to discover will prove that no act of kindness disappears into thin air, even when it seems to have been completely forgotten. That December morning, with the biting air and the sky painted that heavy gray that precedes snow, John opened his own mailbox following the automatic routine of decades and simply froze. His whole body stopped as if an invisible switch had been flipped. There, among the bills and advertisements he expected to find, was an envelope that shouldn't exist. It was old, yellowed with age, with that texture of paper that is no longer manufactured, marked by folds and stains that told a silent story of years stored somewhere hidden. But what really made John's heart race was the absence of any official mark, no stamp, no postmark, no return label. Only his name written by hand, in a trembling, irregular calligraphy, full of emotion, as if each letter had cost immense effort to trace. With hands trembling slightly, John carefully tore open the envelope and found a short, direct note, devastating in its simplicity. "Thank you for never giving up on me. You saved me when I was invisible. Now it's my turn." No signature, no clue as to who had written those words, No context that would allow John to identify where the message came from or where it was pointing. And it was precisely this lack of information that transformed the note into something almost supernatural, a message from a hazy past that refused to be easily deciphered. John felt a shiver run down his spine, that kind of physical sensation that happens when something deep inside you recognizes that you are facing a defining moment, a revelation that will change everything. Who was this person? What exactly were they thanking him for? When had this happened? John spent the entire day restless, unable to concentrate on anything else, mentally reviewing faces, names, and deliveries he had made over nearly 30 years of work. He tried to reconstruct conversations, to recall situations where he might have done something outstanding, but the more he searched the dusty drawers of his memory, the less sense it all made. He had saved so many people over the years, discreetly without fanfare, that it was impossible to identify which one of them might be behind that enigmatic message. And the phrase, "when I was invisible," echoed in his mind like a disturbing mantra, because John knew exactly what it was like to feel invisible, ignored, as if his existence didn't matter to anyone. Anxiety grew like an internal storm over the next 2 days. John slept poorly, waking in the middle of the night, reviewing possibilities, creating theories that crumbled under the weight of a lack of evidence, until on the afternoon of the second day, as the sun began to hide behind the icy mountains of Montana, his phone rang. It was an unknown number, local, but not familiar. When John answered, A.E., professional and kind female voice, identified herself as a lawyer from Helena, the state capital. And the words she spoke next would make the ground disappear beneath John's feet, inaugurating a journey of revelations that would connect his present with a past he had forgotten, but which had never forgotten him. The lawyer identified herself as Sarah Mitchell, from a respected firm in Helena, the capital of Montana, and her opening words sounded completely surreal to John. She said, with the professional formality that lawyers cultivate, that she represented an anonymous client who had recently passed away and left a substantial inheritance specifically to John Walker. Inheritance? There must be a mistake, he replied immediately, his voice thick with confusion and disbelief. I don't know anyone with money, it must be another John Walker. But the lawyer was firm, almost solemn in her response. There is no mistake, Mr. Walker. My client has observed you for years, followed your work, your dedication, and decided that you deserve this. You were chosen very consciously and deliberately. Those words echoed in John's mind like an unsolvable enigma. Had someone been watching him? For years. How was that possible when he spent most of his days completely alone, driving along empty roads, delivering mail to people who barely looked in his direction? It felt like being inside a movie, one of those where reality folds and reveals hidden layers that had been there all along, but invisible to the ordinary eye. The lawyer scheduled an in-person meeting for the next day, and John spent that entire night unable to sleep, trying to process the avalanche of mystery that had fallen upon his quiet and predictable life. When John arrived at the law office in downtown Helena, he was greeted with an almost ceremonial seriousness. Sarah led him to a private meeting room and placed a large envelope on the table, sealed with red wax, as if it were a medieval document. But what she said next made John's heart race in a way he had never experienced. Mr. Walker, my client has left very specific instructions. You cannot open this envelope here. It can only be opened at a specific address, which is written on this card. She slid a small white card across the table, and when John read the address, he felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. It was an abandoned cabin at the end of his own route, a place he knew intimately because he had passed by it every day for almost 30 years. A small, isolated building, surrounded by tall pine trees and absolute silence, with dusty windows and a porch that was slowly collapsing under the weight of time and neglect. John had always assumed that the place was empty, that no one had lived there for decades, that it was just another of the many ghost structures that dotted the rural areas of Montana. But now, holding that sealed envelope and looking at the familiar address, a disturbing truth began to take shape in his mind. Someone had been there, watching, living in that place he thought was forgotten by the world, and that person, whoever it was, had made him, John Walker, the beneficiary of something that still had no name or form. If you're feeling that chill down your spine, that feeling that something extraordinary is about to be revealed, subscribe to the channel now, because what John is going to discover in that cabin will completely change the way you see kindness, legacy, and the invisible power of small gestures. John drove to the location, his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel, the sealed envelope on the passenger seat pulsing as if it had a life of its own. The road was the same one he had traveled for 3 decades, but at that moment every curve, every tree, every stone in the path seemed to carry a new meaning, as if the universe were whispering secrets he was finally about to understand. When he arrived at the cabin, he parked the truck and stood there for a few minutes, just looking at that building that had always seemed dead, abandoned, an architectural ghost of the past. But now, knowing that someone had been there, watching his silent journey for years, the cabin took on an almost sacred dimension, a portal to revelations he didn't know if he was ready to face. The cabin was as isolated as it had always been, surrounded by tall pine trees that created a kind of natural cathedral, where the silence was so dense it seemed to have a texture. John took a deep breath, got out of the truck and walked to the weathered wooden door. He turned the doorknob expecting resistance, locks, the weight of abandonment, but the door opened gently as if it had been waiting for him. And what John found on the other side completely defied his expectations. The house was clean, organized, with simple but well-cared-for furniture, curtains that still hung from the windows with dignity, a smell of wood, and memories that indicated someone had lived there until very recently. It wasn't the scene of decades of abandonment he had imagined, but rather a home that had been inhabited, loved, and carefully preserved. On the wooden table in the center of the main room, perfectly positioned as if awaiting his arrival, lay a photo album with a worn leather cover. John approached slowly, with that instinctive reverence we feel before objects that we know carry important stories. He carefully opened the album, and the first images his eyes met were of a thin boy with large frightened eyes that seemed too old for his young face, always beside a tired woman whose weak smile couldn't hide the weight of a difficult life. There were photos of the cabin in better condition, of a small garden that no longer existed, of simple moments captured in a time that seemed distant and painful. John slowly turned the pages, each image revealing fragments of a life he didn't know, but which was somehow connected to his own. And then, in the middle of the album, he froze. He felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. There was an old photograph, faded, yellowed with age, but unmistakable. It was himself, John Walker, visibly younger, in his postal worker uniform, standing on that same porch where he now was, holding a letter in his hand and looking at the camera with that serious and dedicated expression that had always characterized him. The photo had been taken almost 30 years ago, at a time he barely remembered, but which had clearly deeply marked whoever had kept that image as if it were a treasure. And below the photo, handwritten in careful calligraphy, was a caption that instantly brought tears to John's eyes. The day the angel appeared. Memories began to return like waves crashing against rocks, fragments of a past that John had kept in some forgotten corner of his mind. The 90s. He was a rookie postman, full of energy and idealism, newly assigned to that rural route that everyone avoided. In that cabin, which at the time still had paint on the walls and dying flowers in the garden, lived a single mother with a young son, a boy with enormous eyes who always peeked out the window when John arrived. The woman's name was Linda, he remembered now, and she was visibly ill with that pallor that betrays something serious happening inside. She was penniless, completely isolated, fighting alone against a world that seemed determined to crush her. John delivered the letters, always few, always bills and official documents that brought more worry than hope, and he noticed the growing despair in those tired eyes that could barely sustain eye contact. One day, moved by a compassion he couldn't even rationally explain, John left a basket of food on the cabin's porch, saying nothing, leaving no note, expecting no recognition. He simply placed it there and left, as if it were a natural part of his job. The following week, he left another basket, and then another. He bought basic items like bread, milk, canned goods, and fruit with his own money, which wasn't much, things a child needed to grow up healthy. He never told anyone about it, never mentioned it to his colleagues or supervisor, because for John it wasn't heroism or spectacular charity. It was simply doing what any decent human being would do when witnessing avoidable suffering. It was a simple decision guided by a mindset that placed humanity above convenience. But then, weeks after those silent deliveries, John learned from the local sheriff that Linda had been rushed to a hospital in Helena. The illness had progressed, and she was no longer able to care for her son. Social services were called in and took the boy, whose name John now realized he never knew. He was placed in the foster care system, swallowed up by that bureaucratic machine that processes vulnerable children with more efficiency than compassion. John never saw them again. The cabin was closed, sealed, and slowly consumed by abandonment and oblivion. Linda died months later alone, and John carried that quiet sadness of someone who feels he could have done more, but didn't know exactly what. What John didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams, was that the boy had never forgotten. Those food baskets, those anonymous acts of kindness in a moment of utter despair, had been etched into that child's soul like firebrands. And now, looking around the clean and tidy cabin, leafing through the album that celebrated his presence as if he were a savior, John began to understand the magnitude of the invisible impact he had planted decades ago. The boy had grown up, overcome adversity, built a life, and before recently passing away, had left everything he owned to John, the lovingly restored cabin, a substantial sum of money, and a final letter still sealed inside the envelope he had brought from the lawyer's office. If you're feeling the weight of this revelation that connects past and present so profoundly, subscribe to the channel now, because the final letter John is about to read will reveal the complete transformation his invisible gestures caused in that boy's life. With hands trembling violently, John broke the red wax seal of the envelope he had brought from the lawyer's office. Tears were already streaming down his face before he even began to read, as if his body knew he was about to receive a truth capable of redefining his entire existence. He unfolded the paper with reverent care, and the handwriting he found was the same as the mysterious note he had received days before, but now firmer, more complete, carrying the weight of a lifetime of pent-up gratitude. The letter read, "Mr. Walker, you never knew, but you were the only one who saw me when I was invisible. I was just a scared, hungry boy, watching my mother slowly die, and the whole world passed us by as if we were ghosts. But you stopped. You saw. You left those baskets on the porch as if they were gifts from heaven, and to me that's exactly what they were." The letter continued, and each word was an emotional stab to John's heart. "Because of your quiet kindness, I survived. When I was placed in the foster care system, I could have become just another statistic, another broken child swallowed up by life. But I carried with me the memory of a man who cared without expecting anything in return, who saw value in me when I didn't see it in myself. That memory sustained me. I studied with fierce determination, worked 3 jobs to pay for college, overcame obstacles that seemed impossible. I built a life, Mr. Walker. I became an engineer, helped design bridges connecting isolated communities, got married, was happy. All because an anonymous postman showed me that I mattered, that my life had value, that someone in the universe believed I deserved to continue existing." John could barely see the words through the tears that were now falling uncontrollably. The letter continued, with devastating intensity. "But I never forgot the man who delivered letters to nothing, whom everyone ridiculed, whom everyone ignored. Because to me, you weren't delivering letters, Mr. Walker. You were delivering hope. You were delivering dignity. You were delivering the silent message that lives like mind matter, even when the rest of the world decides otherwise. I bought back this cabin years ago, restored it with my own hands, kept it as a shrine to that memory. And now, diagnosed with a terminal illness, at 42, I want you to live the rest of your life knowing that you were seen, that you mattered, that you saved a life that then saved others, Thank you for never giving up on me. With eternal gratitude, Michael Torres. John collapsed right there on the floor of that cabin, sobbing with an intensity that only comes when 3 decades of misunderstood work, of mockery, of indifference, of internal questioning about whether his life had any meaning, finally find an answer. He wasn't delivering letters. He never was. He was delivering dignity, hope, the fundamental message that every life matters, that no one is so forgotten that they don't deserve to be seen. And now, holding that letter that was simultaneously a farewell and a celebration, John understood that the deepest impact we can have is not in the grand gestures that everyone sees, but in the silent decisions we make when no one is watching, when the only witness is our own conscience. The news spread through Montana like wildfire. When attorney Sarah Mitchell casually mentioned the story at a community meeting, and then a local journalist picked up the thread and published a moving piece in the regional newspaper, the transformation was immediate and overwhelming. The entire community discovered who John Walker truly was, not just the stubborn mailman who insisted on serving forgotten places, but the man whose quiet kindness had saved a life and through it touched countless others. The colleagues who had mocked him at the post office, those who had made cruel jokes about delivering mail to cows, began seeking him out one by one, with downcast eyes and trembling voices, offering genuine apologies for years of misunderstanding and disrespect. Some wept as they pleaded for forgiveness, realizing too late that they had ridiculed a hero who operated behind the scenes while they pursued superficial recognition. The supervisor who had suggested John request a transfer to a real route organized a tribute ceremony at the agency, where he presented John with a commemorative plaque and gave an emotional speech about dedication, purpose, and the true meaning of service. The people of the community, those who for years had barely opened their doors to welcome him, now awaited him with genuine smiles, hot coffee, and long conversations. Children waved as he passed by. Elderly people came out to greet him. John had become, overnight, a kind of local celebrity, but not the kind that seeks the spotlight, rather the kind that reveals to everyone around him what truly matters in building a meaningful life. But for John, and this is crucial to understand, the real prize wasn't the substantial money Michael Torres had left behind, nor the public recognition that finally came after 3 decades of invisibility. The true gift was knowing, with absolute certainty, that his life had meaning, that his daily decisions to wake up early, face loneliness, serve people who didn't appreciate it, weren't wasted in the void of the universe. Every mile traveled, every letter delivered, every discreet gesture of kindness had been recorded in places invisible to human eyes, but eternally etched into the fabric of reality. Michael had proven that nothing is lost, that all kindness returns in mysterious ways, that the real impact of a life isn't measured by the applause received, but by the lives touched when no one is watching. Today, at 55, John still works as a mail carrier on the same rural Montana route. He has refused all offers of transfers to more comfortable positions. People now greet him with warm smiles, coffees specially prepared for him, and sincere hugs. He uses the inheritance Michael left him to help other isolated and vulnerable families, creating monthly food baskets, paying anonymous medical bills, planting seeds of hope in the same discreet way he has always operated. And every time someone asks why he doesn't retire, why he doesn't use the money to travel or rest, John smiles that tranquil smile of someone who has discovered the secret of life and answers with devastating simplicity, because there are still people who need to be seen. John Walker's story reminds us of something the modern world often forgets. The invisible acts of kindness are the ones that most transform the world. You never know how many lives you might be saving with a simple gesture, a kind word, a minute of your attention to someone who seems invisible. Maybe you are someone's John right now, and you don't even know it. Or maybe you need to be reminded that your gestures matter, even when no one seems to notice. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you reflect on the kind of impact you want to leave on the world, leave the phrase "I'm with you until the end" in the comments. I want to know who actually watched this entire story and felt its weight. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, hit that button now, because every Week I bring real stories like this one that make us stop, take a deep breath, and remember what really matters in life. Leave a like too, because that shows me that this type of content is resonating with you and encourages me to continue bringing these narratives that restore faith in humanity. And look, there's a video right here that perfectly complements this topic, another story about how small gestures can create unexpected transformations. Click and continue with me there, because this journey of discovering the power of invisible kindness is just beginning. See you in the next video.